Good morning. Bonjour. Mi nombre es Guillermo. My name is Bill. I am a minister in the United Church of Canada and want to talk to you about something that has affected my life and yours for the last 37 years. First of all, I want to bring greetings from EOOR to EOOR. I had to practice that one, but I've been part of what this conference, the Old Lemon Conference, for 33 years. I was ordained here. I served on both sides of the river, and Four Rivers is flowing strong here. It's so good to see familiar faces. I want to talk to you a bit about El Salvador, and it's something that has impacted my life tremendously, and it's something that began right here in Ottawa. I'm told I'm your pre-entertainment lunch folks, so hang on tight. And so for the last 37 years, the United Church of Canada have been involved with Iglesia Batista Emmanuel in San Salvador. And it began quite interesting. Are there slides? They are. Okay, Emmanuel, God with us, that's where it all began. And so this little church on Smythe Road, the next slide, please. Or not? Oh, I got a clicker. Oh, want to back up. Okay. Emmanuel United Church, Smythe Road, and there was a day, and I was called there in 1987. And on August 1987, as I was trying to figure out what I was doing, a person walked through the door, and he said, "Hola, mi nombre es Juan, mi iglesia es Emmanuel El Salvador." And I said, "Oh," because he used all of the Spanish that I knew at the time. And I said, "Hola, come in." And he came in, and I remember about a week or two before I had read an article in Mandate magazine by Shelley Levine called "A Little Church with a Big Heart." And it was about Emmanuel Baptist Church. And so I said, "Es Iglesia Batista Emmanuel?" And he said, "Sí, and we became friends right there. We still are today. And so I took Juan by the hand and took him to the telephone, because I knew I had a member who spoke Spanish. And I phoned Catherine, and I said, "Hello, Catherine, I'm your new minister. Talk to this guy." and she did. And she invited him, actually, to come to Emmanuel United Church. She said, "Come, sit in the overflow. Just you and I. We'll sit there, and I will translate for you." And that's how it all began. Iglesia Batista Emmanuel. And I've got the clicker. And that's the emblem of the church, and how that whole story began. And I wondered why and how it did begin, and began with such force. And the reason were two things. I think the first was the people, yes, the people from Emmanuel. They were ready for change. And they had been well-groomed, if you will. Wilbur Howard had been the minister there for 11 years and brought the church into wider understanding. And Squire had been moderator and was moderator at the time, as a matter of fact. And Ann gave us a vision as well. And that and wonderful congregation that you see there on the front lawn were ready to move forward. So the ground was ready, and things were going to happen. People were ready to do something. And equally, Juan walked in, and Juan was our angel, and we didn't know it at the time, but he came in looking for hospitality. He came in as a stranger from a strange land, who all he saw was the sign, "Emmanuel, God with us," and that was enough to bring him in the door, and that was enough to allow the congregation to grow. And so here is a picture of some of the folk within the community. Within the first Sunday, Juan came to church with his wife Maria and their 3 kids, and they sat with Catherine at the back. The next week, another family came, and then another, and then another. And in a short period of time, there were more than 100 Salvadorans that were connected with the Emmanuel United Church. And as you can see, they were young families, and they were families that were looking for home. They were looking for hospitality. And the Emmanuel congregation were willing to embrace that, and so we began by printing the words, the Spanish words in the bulletin for the hymns that we would sing, or the words that we would read in English, or vice versa. We'd learn one or two Spanish hymns to sing from time to time. We would have papusas after worship. And if you've tasted papusas, you know what I'm talking about. It was a great way to build community, not only in just bringing the two communities together, with all proceeds going back to Iglesia Batista Emmanuel. In typical United Church form, we formed a committee, and it was called the Salvadoran Liaison Committee, and that reported to the board every week to ensure that the church was on board with this group of us that began with the Emmanuel. I remember 2 weeks before Christmas one year, I got a phone call from the Minister of Immigration saying that there are 2 Salvadorans on minister's permit. Can you sponsor them? And I went to the congregation and I said, these are 2 families and there's no place in Bethlehem to host them. Can we have them come to Emmanuel? And in 2 weeks, we raised $40,000. And it was just a phenomenal outreach. And it was intriguing. Soon they became they have their own service in Spanish and invited me to come and serve communion and to do the homily from time to time, which was a bit of a joke, but it was nice. We wanted to honor their tradition. I borrowed the Baptist church and we baptized their teenagers. A moving experience both for them and for me because I had never done baptism in a baptismal tank before, but it was a wonderful, moving experience and one of ecumenism and partnership as we honored one another. And we hosted their Minister Miguel on a number of occasions, which was a great thing to do. Now, the understanding, the first 5 years of the ministry really was a ministry of pastoral care. These were folk who had lost their language, they had lost their vocation, they had lost their tradition, they had lost the food that they loved to eat, and they were angels with a home. And as a very wise member of the congregation said to me, you need to realize, Bill, and I hadn't at the time, he said, these are not immigrants coming to a new land, these are people seeking refuge who cannot live in their homeland. And that really resonated in my mind as these families came, and I spent many, many hours with them. And again, you can see from the picture that there are younger families and old. Maria on the top left, Maria Castro was the chair of the Board of Deacons during the war and brought all that kinds of energy and focus. All of those families had been arrested, and that's why they came to Canada. Many of them had suffered persecution, and this is just a few of them that are there. Now, I want to tell you about the person at the bottom of the screen whose name is Victor. And Victor was a physician in El Salvador, and he came to me and he said, I'm in Canada now, and actually I should mention he was a physician who became an orderly in Canada because we would not recognize his medical credentials. Tremendous individual. But he said to me, Bill, you can't really understand us unless you see with your own eyes. And so that's what happened. A group of us got together. There were 3 of us, actually, Bob and Margaret Armstrong, and Bob spoke a little bit of Spanish, which was helpful. And the 3 of us left for El Salvador during the war. We had 4 little kids at home. My wife says, you're crazy. I probably was at the time. But there was this sense of, I had to go. I had to see with my own eyes. And we went and spent 3 weeks there. We met with the FMLN. We met with the government. We were picked up by the police. And it was indeed a very moving experience and one which changed my life in many ways. I should mention that this was 3 months after the Jesuits and their housekeepers were killed on the grounds of the Yukon. And so it was very much a reality in my life. So what happened after that was, although the war ended, certainly it didn't, really, because the death squads continued their work. Whenever you saw a Volvo with tinted glass, you knew that was a death squad. And one of my trips down there, my job was to be Miguel's bodyguard. And the reason for that was they wouldn't pick him up if I was with him, because I was a Canadian, and that would be bad press. But if he was by himself, he could be. So I was his bodyguard, and we went different places together just to be there as community. That went on at Emmanuel United and continues, and Grant's going to speak just briefly at the end. It went on at Emmanuel, and then I moved to the Bay of Quinte Conference at that point in time, which is now the EOOR section, and served there, and the people there said, can you continue in some way what you were doing in Ottawa? And so the opportunity came, and it wasn't until 2012 that the opportunity came to take a group. Now, this is the 2024 group, which happened in March. You may recognize a few faces there that came with us this year. There was about 20, 21, 22 people that went, and we went again for a week, for 8 days, to experience that. Groups have gone in 2012, 2014. In 2015, some of us were invited back to a peace conference there. In 2016, we were invited back to monitor the national election. 2018 and 19, and then COVID hit and nobody went anywhere, and then 2024. So over 150 people have visited this congregation, spent a week in El Salvador, and had their lives changed because of it. Now, El Salvador is a very beautiful country, and at one point it was the murder capital of the world, but there's so much to see there. Here's just a little picture of 9 people who this year, and where you can see they're standing there on a glass ceiling, glass floor, I should say. That's at the top of a volcano. And now you can see Grant made it to the top. Now Eric made it to the top, but didn't make the picture for some reason. I admired the picture from the bottom myself. But the beauty of El Salvador is all around. It's a Pacific Ocean country, wrong one. Okay, Pacific Ocean country, and the group is there. The next picture is a small group. This was my group, so how we go is there's a team of leaders, and we all have small groups, and it's basically small group ministry as it works. Each group is responsible for worship. So worship is part of every morning as we focus ourselves, as we are mindful of who we are and what we're about. We touch base during the day. How's it going? Because there's a lot of emotion that is evoked by such a trip. And at the close of the day, we come together again and talk with one another about transformation and faith and how God is seen and viewed in the beauty of El Salvador. Again, the beauty. This is the Pacific Ocean. We get to swim in the Pacific Ocean. There's one day that we're allowed to go to the beach. And Gary, where are you, Gary? Gary was my buddy one year, because you have to swim in buddies. And Gary was my buddy, so I wouldn't drown. And so there we were, along the beauty of the Pacific. And the flora and the fauna are everywhere. The flowers are beautiful, beautiful as the people. And you can see them there. And the walls, there's walls everywhere in El Salvador, and that goes back to the war area where you had to be walled to be protected from the army and the gangs. But what they've done with the walls is they've painted the walls. And Central America is full of color, beautiful, beautiful color. And this is one of the walls, and another one of the walls on this one. And you can see this. And so as you're driving through the streets, this is something that you see. And one of my group had been to El Salvador as a tourist, and she said, it's such a beautiful, peaceful country. But she missed things like this. Most buildings, this is the school, the escuela, we'll talk about in a minute, it is all razor wire on the top. And razor wire is yep, there it is. And it's just typical of what it is. And or signs like this. Now, I had other pictures that were more graphic, but I thought this sort of got the message across. Everybody carries guns. They still carry guns in El Salvador. And so one needs to be careful as to where you go. Now, when we go to El Salvador, we stay in a place called Centro de Gabriel por la Paz. So, in other words, the Gabriel Center for Peace. My first trip there, it was called Circumbi, and you can see the picture of the children there. And that's the reason for that is this was an orphanage during the war. And 100 kids were there who were misplaced or displaced. Parents had been displaced, their parents had been arrested, parents had been killed. And so the church took them all in. And so there were 100 kids there, and I remember so well visiting there with 100 children gathering around in that sense that they felt as if people cared for them. These people from far, far away came to visit them and cared for them. And it was a moving place to be. Again, today, it's called Centro Gabriel por la Pax, and Gabriel was Miguel's brother, and Gabriel was picked up by the death squads, tortured and killed. And so his memory is carried on in this center. Now, this is the center. Now, as you can see, it's not quite a 5-star hotel, but it's a friendly place. And there's room for us, and the rooms are, there's the group standing outside of the center, ready for the day. The rooms are large, if you don't mind 20 people to a room, and you can see the beds are maybe a little old. There are some nets over the beds to protect us, and the dining room is there, and we enjoy wonderful meals of refried beans and pollo and many other delicacies of El Salvador. Now, I mentioned the war. The war went from 1979 to 1992 officially. And this was when the party Arena was in power, and Arena used the military and to suppress the people, especially the poor. Prior to that, there were 13 families that ruled the country, and so there was a time of anxiety during the time. And the FMLN, the Liberation Army, grew and began to take their place in El Salvador. And so we see the FMLN there on one side, and some of the military on the other, and there were guns literally everywhere. This is a picture of the American Embassy. I put that in because the American Embassy gave the Arena government $1 million a day for military aid. This is one of the largest buildings in San Salvador, the American Embassy. Tells you something about politics in Central America. Oscar Romero. You cannot talk about El Salvador without talking about Oscar Romero. And Romero became, he was a parish priest in El Salvador, born there, became bishop. And he was appointed bishop of El Salvador because he had quite a conservative theology. They did not feel as if he would rock the boat in any way, and so they allowed him to be bishop. And his best friend was killed, and Romero became the voice of the people. 2 days before he died, he said this, and excuse the typo, "Even if they kill me, my blood will rise up in my people." Even if they kill me. And he was killed. This picture is everywhere in El Salvador. 3 pictures of him, and he is really seen as the saint of the America, the saint of El Salvador, and in fact is in front of the Roman Catholic Church right now towards being made saint. This is the chapel in which he was killed, and it's part of the tour when you go there. And here's a picture of the inside of the chapel. Bishop Romero was celebrating the Eucharist at a funeral service, and he held up the chalice, and he was shot through the heart. And his memory lives on. Now, that area has become somewhat of a museum now. And to give you an idea about Romero, this was his apartment. The bishop's palace, and I've been to the bishop's palace, which is really a palace there. This is where he chose to live. This is the man he was. He was simple in his outlook, but profound in his ministry and his output. Miguel Castro worked with Romero, and this is Miguel talking to us about his friend. And if you go to the chapel down, or the cathedral downtown, this is the burial of Romero, where many people come to worship. And it's interesting, in that church, there's the basement, the crypt, and then there is the cathedral. The crypt is where most people worship, not upstairs, because that's a place where they feel connected. You cannot visit El Salvador without going to the EOOR, Central America University. This is where the Jesuits were killed, and this is inside the chapel there. The picture of the Jesuits with their housekeepers and signs of the cross on the outside, pictures of torture, as many of the Salvadoran people were tortured. And as you tour there, you see that. Behind the EOOR is where the residence where the priest stayed, and where there are roses now. That's where the bodies were found. And so they planted roses in those places. Again, my memory when I first was there, the grass was still stained by the blood of where they were killed. There's a museum there. The bullets, as you see, went through their garments, went through the Bible, because they just opened fire and everything, and many people died. In the center of the city, there's a wall which has the name of 30,000 civilians that were killed during the war. This is a memorial to the children who were there, and as you move through it, many, many names are there, including Monsignor Romero's name is there, as well as Miguel's brother. The other thing you see in El Salvador is lots of children. Children are everywhere, they're welcoming, they're engaging, and we had the opportunity of visiting them. Emmanuel Baptist has 7 missions in the countryside. And the missions are like these. They have activities, often on a Saturday for the kids, or a Sunday. They have church services. And these groups are just so inviting and so welcoming to us. And again, here's a picture of some of them. They prepared a song for us, and even the enchiladas, as I recall. The church then has a school as well. It's called Colegio, or Colegio Bautista Emmanuel. It goes from kindergarten to end of high school. And the unique thing about this school is it has a program that is united totally to developing a culture of peace. Peace is their initiative. They've written a whole curriculum that the government now is looking at as possibly bringing into place. Again, a tremendous place, one where we engaged in sport with them and many other things, and good conversation. And we had the opportunity of presenting them with 7 computers this year, as well as school goods and many other things that were there. Worship, a big part of our trip. You cannot be a church group going to visit a church unless you engage in worship, and we did that. Here is communion as we prepared it with Miguel. Miguel, again, with the chalice, does not mind. Anyway, and there was a chalice that was given to Miguel by our group this year. And again, we took part in worship. And that's when 2.5 hours can be like 20 minutes because you're engaged and you feel the Spirit in your midst. Now, our group is not a habitat group. It's not a build group. Every year when we go, we say to Miguel, so what is it you'd like us to do? And then, so the response is not what we will do for you, is what we can do together. And so Miguel, going back to 2012, said, I'd like you to help with some building projects as well. This is in the area where we started to build in Alegria, San Rafael. It was a school, and you can see there, I can't see here, but you can see there the beginnings, the cinder blocks, the cement, which was all mixed by hand, the reefer bars that we put in between, and then the other cinder blocks that we put on top, and a rather active piece. We didn't do very much, to be honest. The church had their own folk that watched what we did, and after we left, they corrected our mistakes, and they continued to build. But what was exciting about that school was in 2014, we went back because there were gangs, and the gangs were very active, and so the church said we wanted a fence. And so we built a fence. And you can see there digging, because that was the big part. Everything was dug by hand. Again, concrete mixed by hand, posts driven into the ground. And the fence was to protect the children from the gangs and to keep the gangs out of the school. This was this year because we were asked to go back to the same community, and for me, very moving going back to the same community 3 times in a project, and we were asked to construct, hang on here. We were asked to build a cistern, or 4 cisterns actually, and to collect rainwater and a septic system. One of our members, again with the pick at hand, going to work. 2 of our ministers standing around watching, and it was a great pastime. This is one of the cisterns that went in. So we put the Easter offering around the house. They all went into the cistern. Again, worked during the rainy season, so there would be water there in the dry season. This is our executive minister digging himself into a hole, and actually he dug the hole himself. And again, he's pretty good with a pick and shovel if it comes to that. President of El Salvador, President Burkel is his name. He was elected, this is his 3rd term. He said he would do away with gangs, and he was elected on promise of doing away with gangs. And this is how he did away with gangs. He arrested them all. There's 102,000 people in prisons like that in El Salvador right now. There are people who have not been tried, have not been convicted of crime, and I guess some of them will be in jail for up to 30 years. So 2% of the male population of El Salvador is like this right now. And while some are saying, wow, isn't this wonderful? You can walk downtown because the streets are safe. Others are saying, is this safety? And what is the cost, the human cost of this kind of dictatorship, if you will? This is my final slide, and I thought this one sort of played well for me. On the left side is Alfredo Castro. Alfredo was part of my congregation in Ottawa when I was there, and then moved to Vancouver. Now he's retired, goes back to El Salvador on a regular occasion. And on the other side is our executive minister, Eric, and they are carrying a heavy, heavy pail of dirt. And I thought, this is what my vision was of El Salvador at the very beginning. If we can share the load, if we can carry the same pail, if we can help one another. Sister, brother, let me be your servant, let me be as Christ to you. And that's the ministry that was and is for the last 37 years and will continue between the United Church of Canada, started in this area, and Iglesia Batista Emmanuel. And I want to just ask Grant just to speak. Now you got 3 minutes, Grant, because this was his first trip to El Salvador, and we wanted him to be part of it because we wanted Emmanuel United to be at the core of what we're doing. So, my friend Grant, you don't have to click. I'm not. You don't have to click anything. I'm done.
Thank you, Bill.
Okay.
Thank you, Bill.
So I'll say a few words about my trip to El Salvador, in the footsteps of Bill. I went to Emmanuel. I arrived in Emmanuel in Ottawa in September of 22. And I've wanted, ever since I arrived there, I've just wanted to keep learning more and more about the congregation. I'm so grateful to be moved from Newfoundland, Labrador, first on Eastern Edge of my home. That's where I was born and reared and grew up. I love it. I love my home. But to be transplanted to a new place and to be accepted and welcomed by a new church, a new congregation, a new community of faith was wonderful. But my goal of entering any pastoral charge is to learn as much as I can. So a part of my time at Emmanuel so far has been learning, taking in whatever the ministries are, the corners of the ministry in the church. And one of those corners is our global partners. And Iglesia Batista Emmanuel is one of our global partners. And I had the opportunity to go to El Salvador in March. And actually before that, November before that, in 23, Miguel and Lydia Castro came to visit Emmanuel, and we had worship. Well, they visited East Central Ontario communities of faith as well as Emmanuel, and they led worship for us at Emmanuel, and I said to Miguel, from my point in the pulpit, I said, "Now, Miguel, thank you so much for being here, you and Lydia. What I want to do is come to your home now, and I want to learn more about you in El Salvador." So I got the opportunity to do that with Bill, myself, and congregations from East Central Ontario, representatives from the East Central Ontario region. So I was a lone wolf, kind of, but I was with Bill and with the folks from East Central Ontario, who I've now made lifelong friendships with. So I'm very, very grateful for that. Got to visit. I got to be a part of an irrigation project. I didn't lay cinder blocks, but I did carry a pipe to help dig and help put an irrigation system together. So that was great. The weather was hot. It was 35 degrees every day, and our beautiful home at Central Gabriel, Para La Paz, beautiful home. I mean, that was our home for 7-8 nights, and the meals were wonderful, and the people of El Salvador and Iglesia are determined, committed, faithful, joyful people in the midst of all their obstacles, in the midst of all their difficult history, continue to smile and serve their God with joy. And it was a privilege to be a part of that, and I would love to see that again in my future. We'll see what the future holds for me. But that's just a glimpse, a sliver of my experience in El Salvador. Thank you very much.
So talk to Grant, talk to Eric, talk to myself. I'm going to be staying over lunch about El Salvador. Next trip is in 2 years. It takes a while to raise money in order to get people to go. We try to make it as cost effective as possible. And you all are welcome, and your lives will be changed simply by entering the program. Thank you so much.